Welcome to the Week Ahead, a podcast by SBM Intelligence. I'm your host, Veronica Pana Ikube. Every Friday, we explore stories that are shaping the African continent. Last week, we were off as a result of the Eid. Would like to wish our listeners Eid Mubarak in arrears. President Tinubu led the charge to strengthen ties with the United Kingdom through a historic visit that secured a £746 million loan to upgrade key ports. How will this deal balance improved trade efficiency with concerns about reliance on UK-linked funding terms? Nigeria's central bank has tightened BVN and remittance rules to reduce fraud, while banks have raised 4.61 trillion naira to grow stronger. How will these measures impact financial inclusion and customer access to banking services? Tensions between South Africa and the United States are rising over foreign policy disagreements, even as global shipping disruptions boost South African costs. How can Pretoria balance diplomatic strength with the economic gains from rerouted trade? Joining us on the podcast today is Samuel Atiku. He's an economic analyst. He's going to join us for more insights on these critical stories. Welcome, Samuel, to the podcast.
Hi, thank you, Veronica. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
It's always a pleasure. Let's begin with our first story. Um, there's we've over the well, I say this year we've seen kind of President Tinubu make certain, movements or agreements. Last time it was Turkey, and now he made a state visit, which was really, really interesting to see. It was a whole straight state visit to the UK. And he was able to secure a landmark deal for Nigeria, a financing deal to, kind of boost our ports, especially the Apapa ports as well and others. But it's really interesting to see all the, moves that the Tinubu-led administration is doing. This visit was really, really significant. It's been a long time since a Nigerian president had a state visit. I mean, we saw him meet King Charles and other royals. It was really a huge success. If you look at it from the Tinubu administration. But I think that, all this, the average Nigerian will say, how does this visit benefit me? Right? What difference is it going to make in the life of the average Nigerian on the streets? So people say, okay, the ports in Apapa, the ports is in Lagos it's not in every state in Nigeria that, there's a visibility of the ports. So this money coming in to refine our ports and, to make a change in it, what difference are we going to see? And how will that also impact the every Nigerian?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think it's how will I put it now? I think there are foundational issues that we can always point to, and then you will see how all those things actually pass through to everybody's pocket. Um, I will start by actually let's look at I think to actually look at the foundational issue. The first thing is this: any investment, any money that comes into a country should be seen as positive as long as that money is not hot money. So in economic terms, we'll typically call it capital formation. So capital formations are actually funds that come into the country and they're used to improve, to actually more like give the economy more like a shot in the arm, create jobs, and then with that job, there's always a cascading effect. So just imagine you employing someone now, a man or a woman with a family of about, let's say, four, is employed. That that family may decide to send their children, to a private school next to you, and that creates jobs. And then you have that cascading effect because you now there's a primary school, a secondary school close to you that's a private school. The child is going there and the parents are paying school fees. You employ the teacher because the teacher is also having money from that system. The teacher can also go to the market to buy certain things, and then you have that cascading effect, which we call, and then the rate at which it goes is what economy will term something like velocity of money, the speed at which money actually move around the economy. And that's why every $1 that comes into an economy could create up to $8 in terms of value. At least that's been what we've think. I mean, that's the way we should always think about it. But I think there are fundamental issues we need to actually look closely at. I think the first thing to think about is that we have a $746 million investment coming into the country to upgrade the port. Now, the first question is that which port? I think is the Lagos port, the Apapa port, and the Tinkan port. Remember, we have the Lekki port that is now, if you remember, I think our last podcast, we talked about how majority of the activity, especially the shipping activities in Nigeria, seems to be concentrated in the Lekki port. And then it's beginning to move also to the Rivers port, the Delta port, and then the Calabar port itself. So this is actually targeted at two of, I'll call it the most central two, among other things. Now, if we remember during the Obasanjo's tenure, that these two ports were consensus. I mean, we had this concession model, which is more like a landlord port model. The federal government continues to own those ports, but they gave out the terminals, or I will use that word loosely, the terminals, to some private concessionaires to manage it, and they were given certain things to do. So the question to ask is that have those people that got these concessions, I mean these concessions, I mean this concession, I mean the concessionaires, have they done what they are supposed to do? Is this investment coming to actually correct the failures over the years, or are we expanding the port? I think there's no clarity around what we intend to do. Notwithstanding that, we know certainly that if you look at the landlord system that we're operating in our port, the responsibility for assets like the quarry wall, the channels, the common assets, and other shared infrastructure will still fall on the federal government. So the key takeaway here is that what spec going to use this fund to do? Are we coming to actually bail out, actually plug the holes that those concessionaires had failed to plug, or are we expanding the cohort? Are we fixing certain things? I think there are no clarity around that. I think that's the first issue I will pick up. Then the second issue I will also talk about is this. If you look at this deal, I know for certain that in the UK, they're struggling, the steel industry in the UK has been struggling. And so the UK government, in negotiating this deal, brought their industry into the mix, meaning that I think about 70 out of almost 10% of the fund will be going to actually bring in British steel to help fix certain things within the port. Now, for clarity, the UK is not doing badly in terms of steel. I think they do about 5 million tons of steel per annum. Nigeria have a capacity to produce 11 million tons, meaning that in effect, Nigeria's capacity seems to be bigger than that of the UK. That means we should be producing more steel than the UK. So unfortunately, in Nigeria, we just have the capacity, but in terms of utilization, I think we are barely doing 1 million tons. And because there are legacy challenges that we've not actually solved in the country, and that's why we're not doing up to 10 million. The question is that what was the thinking of the federal government when this agreement was being signed? Was it was the federal government thinking about our own domestic steel manufacturers where they brought on the table to actually better foster those things? So those are the two foundational issues that needs to be clarified. But that said, to your question, I think my view is that the deal is economically significant because one thing is very certain: Apapa Port and Tinkan Port, they still matter enormously in Nigeria's trade. But I think that Nigeria is no longer operating the old port reality. That we need to know that we now have more ports. The Lekki port is there, the Horn port, the River port, the Delta port, the Calabar ports are there in the picture also. So, in the way we think about things, we need to begin to widen our scope in how we think through decision making, especially around our port. I think those things needs to be clear. That needs to be clarified. Um, I would say the impact of this, just like you're asking, is first thing first, it creates job. That's the first starting point. Because if you are going to go into construction, you are going to spend heavily there, you have to create jobs. You have to create construction jobs. Construction jobs are good producing job, meaning that for every one construction job you create in the economy, it has a potential of creating 4 to 8 different kind of jobs in the long run. So that's the first positive thing, meaning that in essence, the investment could cascade and create jobs for especially the youthful population of Nigeria. I think that's the first the first takeaway. The second thing also is this: if we have an upgraded port system, it facilitates quicker logistical movement of goods and services. If we want to export goods, it's faster. If you want to bring in goods, it's faster. It reduces this waiting period that we've always dread, right? We've always talked about this thing. How fast can you take goods through the Nigerian system? So one way or the other, if you're upgrading your infrastructure, it hastens it up, it speeds up things. And that is good turnaround, especially when you look at the cost of doing business in Nigeria. I think that's the second thing I will talk about here. The third thing I will also mention is that aside from those two bounding points itself, it also demonstrates that Nigeria could actually attract investment from, I'll call it, where we've not been attracting investment. Historically, Nigeria has been attracting investment from China. We've been drawing a lot of investment, especially from Asia, and then from the Middle East, from Turkey. But I think Europe have not necessarily been investing in the country. So this about a breakaway from what we've known. I think it's a positive one when you look at that. That means we could walk up to the UK, we could walk up to, say, Germany, Spain, the European Union, and convince them to come and invest in the country. I think that's another positive things to take. Overall, I will say, yes, there are foundational issues around transparency of the deal. I think you begin to hear high tech again featuring in this deal. People will raise those eyebrow. What's going on here and all those things. And again, the former agreement between the concessionaires, just like I've mentioned, so that I'm not repeating myself. Then you talk about even the transparency. How does this even benefit the Nigerian steel industry? Will Nigerian cement industry be used, right? The concrete industry, will they be used in actually fixing some of these things? What will be the impact of this on the road in Apapa itself? We know that place is congested. There's a reason why we are going to Lekki. What's going on in there? So we could ask a lot of operational questions. But I think I will just end by saying that any money that comes into the country that creates job is something that should be welcomed.
I mean, I agree with you on one hand where you said, this is good for for the country. It also shows, that we can get more money, but from other nations as well. But I would always say, and I mean, you also say this as well, Nigeria has to find more innovative ways of raising funds for ourselves as opposed to tying ourselves with getting it from other foreign countries or foreign organizations as well. So to our second story where we see the Central Bank of Nigeria kind of, you know, have new stiffer um protocols for the BVN, restricting registrations to adults and locking down phone numbers, modifications. All these are aimed to combat identity theft and money laundering. I mean, it's good on one hand that we're seeing the central bank respond like this, but on one hand, we're trying to, deepen financial inclusion and ensure that those who are unbanked, get banked, try to catch that population. What are your thoughts on this new BVN protocol and, remittance by the CBN? Do you think it's a good move? Do you think it's going to make banking more difficult for people in the rural areas? Or do you think it's really a nice move? Secondly, we've also seen that Nigerian banks have been able to raise trillions of naira in order to strengthen their balance sheets as well. So what does this mean for the banking customers? Does that mean that we're going to see better services from the banks as well, or it's just going to be still business as usual?
Yes, I think my reading, I mean, just to be very explicit here, I think my reading is that the CBN is trying to clean up the entire financial architecture, the connecting dot, that's from the identity to the payment, remittance, and then the balance sheets of the bank themselves. So I think it goes beyond actually fraud star. I think they must have observed something within the architecture, the financial architecture of the Nigerian system, and they are trying to clean it up from the point goal, that's from the macro level, the micro level up to, I'll call it the broader level, which is the balance sheet level. I think I would just pivot around the BVN rules. I mean, just to put that in context. If you look closely at what the CBN is doing, they are trying to create a two-tier system or even a three-tier system. Accounts and wallets, right? You have where BBM, where you actually either use your BVM or you use NIN in doing the know your customer and the KYC systems. Then you have the tier two and the tier three that requires you to submit both BVN and then NIN and then all those kind of things. The truth is this. What information do you have in the BVM? You have your identity, right? You have your biometrics information. You have your address, and then you have your biometric information in the BVM. What information do you have in the NIN? You have your biometrics, you have your address. There's no difference. It's just that who owns what and who collects what is where the problem lies. We've always talked about this historically in Nigeria, that there's a way you could consolidate all these things into one and move on. So this concept of you have BVN or you have NIN, you're just having the same set of information. With a BVN, you should be able to get your INN if the system is integrated. And the same thing vis-a-vis also, both ways. I think during the time that the NIN was being, when they were chasing the NIN then, there was this concept of actually integrating the two together. And some people were lucky to actually get it through. So the takeaway here is that the BVN, yes, the BVN do, the argument the CBN is making is that the BVN makes the system safer, right? And then you can trace things, it becomes traceable, they are auditable trace, and then, but we have to understand that we don't have to put complex, I mean, the world is not as complex as we are making it look. So my take here is that we are just wasting our time trying to create different tiers of a banking system at the micro level when the quality and the information that you have in both systems are very identical. Why not just move on with that and let everybody rest? I think that's the first thing. The second level you talked about is the remittance, right? What the CBN is really doing is formalizing remittance. They are trying to make the official channel at least more convenient for diaspora users and also making them more transparent and easy to supervise. That's the way they portrayed it. So typically, non-resident BVM platform will now be set up, ABCD, ABCD. People could read about that. Again, there are question mark around that. Why are we creating regulations? Why are we over-regulating things that we need not regulate? The problem we've had historically in Nigeria is that any positive thing that we see happening, especially remember, during the advent of the fintech, when the fintechs were starting up in Nigeria, we tend to bring in regulation to scuffle people's neck and make it difficult for people to expand their business. And that has hold us down. In fact, in Nigeria, about the only country in the world to grind pepper, there's regulation. If you want to do tiling, there's regulation. If you wake up in the morning, you want to walk in front of your street, somebody will bring one regulation. Even if those regulation does not exist, somebody somewhere, whether it's the local government, the state government, or the federal government, will introduce its own regulation just to make life difficult for people. So the whole essence of governance is not to make life easier for people, but rather to regulate people to death. And we need to stop that mentality. We need to be libertarian in our way of thinking. African, I mean, if you look at that historically, that is not how Africa is built. Africa is built on actually allowing innovation, people expanding their whole idea. So what I've talked about now, if you look at the BVN rule, and then you come down to the remittance rule, and then you'd like to bond it against. It's just CBN exerting its.
I agree with you. I mean, the overregulation, I mean, and even when the fintech started, I do agree that, the sector kind of saw like um some overregulations as well. And that will now cause like different overlap.
Okay. I mean, back to the core question here. Just like I've said, the role of the central bank and government is actually not to regulate people to death. The problem in Nigeria is that we overregulate. Now we're creating multiple tiers when it comes to the BVN, the NIN framework, the onboarding system. We want to create different tiers of bank accounts based on the same set of information. It doesn't make sense. I mean, if you ask anybody, what's in the BVN information, and then your what do you call it? Your locational from time to time. If you look at the NIN, the national identity numbers itself, and then the database itself, what you have there is your biometric information. And also, you have, what do you call it, a little bit of locational information. That's all. So, why do you need to show both to open certain types of account and show one to open one account? The information is the same thing. And that's why we need a framework that integrates our data together and stop wasting people's time and effort and trying to create multiple tiers of bank account. Why we understand that the central bank is trying to be very careful, ensuring things are safer, the system is safer, there are auditable trails. I mean, auditable trail that you can use to actually pay, especially when it comes to fraud. We need to be cognizant of the fact that it's a complete waste of time to collect your name. Oh, I put your name on this. Mr. A's name is actually written on a on a Mac computer. Mr. B's name is written on a Windows computer. Oh, for those that have Mac computer, we'll give you this type of account. For those that have Windows computer, we'll give you this type of account. If you have both, we'll give you this type. It's a complete waste of people's time. I think that's the first point to make here. The second thing on the remittance again, when you look at the remittance itself, Nigeria seems to be doing well. I mean, I think the sector is already overregulated. I mean, to be candid with people, I mean, to be smooth. Now, I recall some years ago doing the last CBN government, when this last central bank governor was in there, the fintech sector were doing fantastically well, helping to roll in remittance into the country. People need convenience, especially people in diaspora. They need convenience to be able to send money into the country. And people were finding creative ways of ensuring that people get those money in. But unfortunately, they overregulate the sector and kill that sector. Now, on the back of that, they are still bringing in more regulation. They expect people to begin to do non-resident BVN platform, ABCDEFGA. It's so difficult. I mean, just imagine how big the world is. How many points do you want to set up in the world for people to register? Think about that for a second. The problem with Nigeria is that we overregulate things. In fact, if you to operate a grinding machine, you need regulation. You see people overregulate. Tilers, you regulate them. People painting, you regulate. When do we stop this regulation? When do we start regulating to the nobody in the world regulates the way we regulate. We over-regulate things and make it difficult for innovation to even foster. The third thing, I mean, and for context, if you look at AI now, people talk about AI. It's after innovation comes and then you see the danger of innovation that you can now step in to begin to plug some holes. But unfortunately, in Nigeria, any loophole that people see, they plug into, especially government, they jump in and then begin to overregulate. So I'm not comfortable with what we're seeing, especially in terms of remittance. While we understand that yes, some of these remittance can actually find its way to begin to fund some very horrible and terrible activities within the country. But we need to be careful that we are not regulating ourselves out of existence. Now, the third bit itself is about, I think the third question you asked about recapitalization. Now, if we recall, There were 4-point recapitalization agenda that was set out around March of 2024 that the CBN will raise the minimum capital requirement, especially for international commercial banks, to 500 billion, 200 billion for regional banks. I mean, sorry, so 200 billion for national bank, and then you have 50 billion for regional banks. What has happened between that time, that's April of 2024, and March of 2026, is that a lot of money had been raised. I think if I recall what you mentioned something about 4.6 trillion naira had been raised in fresh capital. But my concern is that 27% of that fund is actually foreign from foreign investors. The question is that what kind of investors are coming into the Nigerian banking sector? What value did they bring? etc etc before I start talking. I think the key thing there is that yes, the recapitalization drive tell us that Nigerian banks are still attractive, especially to serious money. And that stronger banks are not automatically more inclusive. We need to remember that. It doesn't mean that because they have a lot of money, it's going to mean that people will begin to have mortgage, businesses will begin to get loans and all those things. That's not the case. I mean, we've had that experience in the past. I think the Central Bank of Nigeria should focus on the real substance, ensuring that money begin to, I mean, people in the real economy of the country, consumers begin to get access to finance. That's at the core that what the central bank should focus its attention on, rather than all this cosmetic raise capital. We raise 500 billion and then celebrating the fact that we've raised 4 trillion, as if the government of Nigeria do not spend more than that, wasting some of those monies on some, I'll call it frivolous items. I think we need to focus on something that is more substantive. How much fund, how much banks, how much is Nigerian banks actually able to fund almost about 4 million families to be able to own their house? That's what I want to see. How many small businesses have been able to access funds from Nigerian banks at reasonable interest rate to expand their business and employ, say, 20 million people? Those are fundamental, real things that we want to see. I will end by saying that the core issue here, my view is that yes, why it is good for the CBN to pursue those cleanup of the financial system, I think the BVN, the identity rules, etc., are complicating issues. And they are one way or the other most likely going to stifle and then hold down innovation. And then this cosmetic concept of actually building our hope around recapitalization as if it's an outcome itself needs to stop. I think we should focus on the real substance of banking itself, ensuring that the Nigerian bank is diversified, the asset class actually reflect and is connected to the people of Nigeria. That is what we need to focus our attention on, not these cosmetic things.
I agree with you as well, but let's see how, this new restructuring by the central bank has, what effect it will have on the Nigerian economy as well and strengthening the banking sector. On to our final story, where, I mean, we've had this conversation with the tension between South Africa and the United States. It's been there for a while and it's still there. We've seen the president of South Africa try to amend some bonds, but I don't know if that's happening. But now that we're seeing um the global disruption of shipping, and South African ports can benefit from this. I mean, just in your opinion, how can South Africa, mend these fences and just benefit? Because I mean, it's what is good for the country that they should focus on and try to move forward. So what's your thoughts on this? How can South Africa move forward on this and mend fences
I
really?
think, yeah, I think we are in a new world. To be candid, I mean, we're in a new world. Historically, the US have been very careful in how they use words. But what we've seen in the last 1 year of the Trump administration is very simple and straightforward. Facts do not matter. What matters is this perspective and the perception of the President of the United States. What the President of the United States thinks at a point is what is actually carried through as facts. And that is what has created a friction between the United States and South Africa. And not only that, it has also created friction between the Nigerian states and South Africa and then many others, including even the European Union. The European Union and Europe at large, and also the United States. So the trajectory of travel, the direction of travel suggests that one needs to give or take. I mean, recall some weeks ago or days ago, the president of the United States sat in the office with the prime minister, the premier of Japan, and used some words that is unheard of, right? Was referring back to the how the United States used a nuclear bomb to actually raise young children. And those people had moved on. They seems to have forgiven the United States, but rehashing it and using it as a diplomatic toolkit to reinforce maybe certain things or the other. I think those are we are in a very different world as we speak. Now to your question on South Africa. If you recall in 11th of March 2026, um, we had some very undiplomatic remark by the US ambassador. And that is very critical. People need to remember that that is not normal. And this disagreement, and that's one of those things that actually escalated some of these disagreements. My take here is that how do South Africa mend this thing? I think there's nothing to mend. The truth is that you either assume your position in the world and say, oh, we're actually a smaller, we need the US, and then you try to just take what comes your way. And we've seen the South Africa president actually gone to the White House, brought people on there, tried to explain in the front of the camera, and I'm sure outside of the camera, what's going on in South Africa. But the US seems to be hell bent on, again, just like I said, what the president of the United States see as fact should be seen as fact. This is our unprecedented period, and we see that already showing in AGOA, in many of those economic challenges that we see. To put it to context and then to actually ground this over, I will say that we are getting to a tipping point where the world needs to begin to decouple from the US so that US itself, the United States itself, begin to see African countries like South Africa, like Nigeria, as partners, not as a small child that they can actually pull around. Now, it will take us time. If I mean, for instance, Nigeria, we don't even have the lever to do that. It will take us time to get there, but in terms of the strategy you begin to implement going forward, I think that's very critical that we need to begin to think in that direction. So that we don't come back to this, how do you call it, this quagmire that we find ourselves. Yeah, I think it's a very difficult place to be sincere. I never imagine in geopolitics that we find ourselves in a situation whereby we plug ourselves there. So I will say my view is that the strain between South Africa and the United States is serious because it now touches on diplomacy, it's eating at trade, there are political legitimacy around it. South Africa sees it as a sovereign issue. They have redress, there's non-alignment, and it becomes its foreign policy. Washington itself, the United States, is increasingly seeing South Africa as politically difficult. So there are disagreements. So the question is, how do we bring them together? Also, we need to remember that at the same time, there's routed shipping around Cape Town, right? If you look at Cape, right, you see a whole lot of things that's happening around the South African ports, especially around their maritime services. So the real challenge, I think, for South Africa is to why they try to prevent those diplomatic conflict from deepening, I mean, from actually aggravating into serious economic damage for them. I think they need to begin to think through how they can decouple the economy because they so much rely on the American economy. And one way or the other, they are coupled together. How do they begin to decouple? I think that's where the biggest problem is for South Africa. I think they need to begin to look at maybe temporary means to boost their competitive long-term logistics system, etc., etc. So I would say I think South Africa needs to look at China. The alternative, they need to look at the European Union as alternative to what presently exists, and they need to be smart about it. They need a very solid strategy to actually overcome some of these challenges. And it's not peculiar to South Africa. If it's happening to South Africa, certainly the impact, especially on the neighboring countries around South Africa. And we see that happening already in West Africa in terms of Nigeria. And we are seeing the impact itself, how it's moving across the whole of West Africa. And you see Nigeria already pivoting towards the United Kingdom. That's the conversation we see. I think we are pivoting again towards the European Union, and then we've always historically pivot around the Chinese. So I think South Africa must, which is interesting to say, must learn from the Nigerian space. We need to find a diplomatic way of slowing down the damage to the economy while they begin to decouple. I think that's just it.
I agree with you as well. South Africa has to find a way to address those issues. And I mean, as you have pointed out, that's not the only African country that is facing those issues. And I mean, we live in different times, as you actually pointed it out. We do live in different and interesting times as well. That concludes today's episode. Thank you very much, Samuel, for being with us on the podcast and for sharing your amazing insights as always.
Thank you always for having me on the podcast. Really appreciate it.
To our listeners, this podcast is by SBM Intelligence. You can access our podcast by searching for SBM Intelligence anywhere you find podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't. Share, and drop your comments in the comment section. For deeper insights into our work, you can visit our website at sbmintel.com. Remember to connect with us on all our social media platforms. You can find us on X, Facebook, Blue Sky, and LinkedIn at SBM Intelligence. Thank you for tuning into the week ahead. Join us the upper week after the Easter holidays for more updates that are shaping the African continent. And happy Easter to our listeners.